Welcome back, everyone. This is For the Love of Comics playing 31 Days of Comics, the prompt-based comics recommendation game that we play from time to time on this channel. Today we are tackling day 19 of 31 Days of Comics, and the prompt is a comic that you quote from. And at first, I found myself, like I have on occasion before, I found myself a little flummoxed because I honestly couldn't recall quoting comics. Now, I do quote movies and TV shows all the time. In fact, in my very previous episode of 31 Days of Comics, a comic that deserves its soundtrack, I started that episode quoting from a movie and a TV show. So I do quote from movies and TV, and if I'm feeling particularly erudite, I quote from novels, sometimes even plays. But comics, I couldn't quite remember if I do. I asked my wife about this, who said, does it count if you're quoting a movie that is based on a comic? Are you actually quoting the movie or the comic? I asked her if she has any examples of those, and she said I probably have quoted Scott Pilgrim. And then I was like, oh yeah. Then I started, as I often do with these categories, I started thinking about it a little bit more closely. I realized that I do quote comics, but not in the same way as I quote those other things I mentioned. Maybe because movies and TV shows have an audio component to them, and I think it's because quoting something seems to be very either text-oriented or very audio-oriented. And although there is text in a comic, you could argue in the same way that there is text in a novel, somehow the text of a comic seems to be more integrated into the visual presentation. Is it because comics are so much more a visual thing? I mean, so are movies, but movies have that audio component, and the accent and the delivery of it might be part of how we use to quote it. But the honest truth is I do quote comics, but not necessarily verbally. The way that I have found that I and many other people, including good friends of mine, quote comics the most is visually, by extracting a panel or a couple of panels and either posting or sharing that image of a chat. This is why a certain kind of meme or GIF is appealing to me. Not only do they marry together image and text in a way that works for anyone who's been reading comics for a while, but they also seem the most accurate way of evoking quotation, where you're not leaving out a very significant part of whatever it is you're quoting. So once I'd gotten to this, I decided that's what I'm going to make this category about. I'm going to make it about a comic that I have extracted a panel or panels from most often and use that to stand in for quote. And my pick was going to be Corto Maltese, saying, I'm not serious enough a man to give advice and too serious of a man to take it. And I'm ironically paraphrasing here because before I could look up to confirm, another better choice came to mind. Once again, when talking about a comic for 31 Days of Comics, I returned to my childhood because I've realized that ever since I was young, I have been verbally quoting, not just pictorially, but verbally quoting the adventures of Asterix. Just the way that Captain Haddock's invective from the Tintin comics, billions of blue blistering barnacles and things like that, just in the way that those words were fun to say as a kid, so were the Romans from Asterix comics fun to impersonate for me as a child, saying things like by Jupiter. And in particular, when Obelix gets drunk, he starts slurring his words and saying perfectly right instead of perfectly right, and zigactly instead of exactly. And that one word with its spooneristic gymnastics has probably been quoted by me more often than I can count in my life. So much so that outside of purely formal environments, I probably say zigactly half the times that I mean to say exactly. At this point of time, good old inebriated Obelix has probably rewired my brain more than I care to admit. Once I'd recognized how deep these hooks were actually into me, I couldn't have chosen anything else. So that's my odd little take on day 19 of 31 Days of Comics. But I'd love to hear something a lot more sophisticated, or maybe just as peculiar and idiosyncratic from you. In the comments below, put down not only a comic that you quote from, but what that quote actually is. If you're a fan of Asterix, check out my Asterix playlist of videos and stay tuned for a very special live stream next weekend in which I'm going to attempt to rank all of the Goscinny and Uderzo Asterixes in a tier list together. Thanks to patrons and members whose support keeps this channel running. Thank you all for watching. This has been For the Love of Comics, and I'll see you at the next video.